generation to generation. On Mother's Day, we always face a quandary. Each of us has a mother, but many of us are not and never will be mothers. Some of us are disqualified by our plumbing. Others of us have made life choices or have other circumstances which have led us not to bear children. For many of us, our relation with our real mothers is or was fraught with conflict. Some of us may relate more warmly to people who raised us who are not our biological mothers. Yet our biological parents are a vital link in DNA to the rest of the human race. Our seventh principle calls us to affirm and promote the interconnected web of all existence. And our parents are our most immediate nodes in that biological web which encompasses all of the human family. This morning I'd like to kind of collapse Mother's and Father's Day and think about generations. I'd like us to think about the highly improbable string of events that have led to each of us being here today. When we try to plan our lives, our course for the future, we're guided by probabilities and an understanding of the way the world works. But we ourselves, each of us individually, are the result of highly improbable events going back to the beginning of the human race. Generation means bringing something into being that was not here before. You can generate ideas. You can generate wealth. You can generate electricity. Mothers and fathers generate babies, as traditionally conceived, though through the miracle of modern reproductive technology and the new family constellations, the story today is much more complex. But just think, for example, I was born in 1948, so I was probably conceived in September of 1947. Before the moment I was conceived, I existed only as the merest potential. There was one of dozens of egg cells in my mother's body, one of thousands of sperm cells in my father's body, which would someday meet. But until they did, I had no existence. The meeting of one particular sperm and one particular egg is a biological prerequisite for every one of our existences here today. But what chain of events, social, romantic, historical, brought about that biological union? I'll mention one contingency from my own prehistory. You probably have a story that you could tell like this. My mother was named Bessie. After she died, I was going through an old photo album of hers and came across a picture of her and my father, whose name was Hoke, at a house party in 1939 when they had first met. They are standing outside, leaning against a parked car at someone's weekend house, a lake house near Columbia, South Carolina. And there's a third person with them, my mother's best friend at the time, whose name was Harriet. It struck me, here's the man who would become my father, standing between two beautiful women. And he could as easily have fallen for Harriet as for Bessie. Harriet went on to marry someone else, and I've known Harriet's children all my life, and I could almost have ended up in that family, except that then I wouldn't be me. What was it that made the young law student Hope fall for Bessie instead of Harriet? Was it her effervescent personality, her face, her smile, her figure, her smell, her taste? If any of these things had been different, might each have chosen someone else? And the cost of that choosing would be that I would not be standing before you today. These reflections are sparked by one of the most remarkable sermons preached in General Assembly in recent years. The Reverend Dr. Forrest Church of All Souls in New York in 2008, after it became clear that he would soon die of cancer. It was a kind of a valediction called Love and Death, based on his remarkable book by the same title. And towards the end of it, he addresses the question of whether it is fair that bad things like cancer happen to good people. Quote, "What did I do to deserve this?" we ask when things turn against us, forgetting that we did nothing to deserve being placed in the way of trouble and joy in the first place. The odds against each one of us being here this morning to pose such a question are so mind-staggering that they cannot be computed, unquote. In other words, the gift of life itself, your individual existence, has to weigh in the balance anytime you're concerned about the hand fate has dealt you. As I said, I had no existence at all before September of 1947, yet today I'm almost halfway through my 7th decade. Generation builds on generation. Improbability builds on improbability. Here's how Forrest Church explained it, quote, "Consider the odds more intimately. Your parents had to couple at precisely the right moment for the one possible sperm to fertilize the one possible egg that would result in your conception. Right then, the odds were still 1,000,000 to 1 against your being the biological answer to the question, being the answer to the question your biological parents were consciously or unconsciously posing." Let me give you that sentence again. I was on trouble with it. Your parents had to couple at precisely the right moment for the one possible sperm to fertilize the one possible egg that would result in your conception. Right then, the odds were still 1,000,000 to 1 against your being the answer to the question your biological parents were consciously or unconsciously posing. And that's just the beginning of the miracle. The same unlikely happenstance must repeat itself throughout the generations. Going back 10 generations, this miracle must repeat itself 1,000 times. 1,250,000 times going back only 20 generations. That's right, from the turn of the 12th century until today, we each have, mathematically speaking, approximately 2.5 million direct ancestors. This remarkable pyramid turns in on itself, of course, with individual ancestors participating in multiple lines of generation, until we trace ourselves back to when our ancestors, the founding couple, whom each one of us carries in our bones, began the inexorable process that finally gave birth to us all, kith and kin, blood brothers and sisters of the same mighty mystery. End quote. Forrest Church. The picture this paints is of a vast carpet of improbable accidents, which has generated all the humans who have lived from the beginning of the race up until now, including thou and I. The ancient Jews placed great store on generations. Just after the story of Adam and Eve, the book of Genesis takes many verses to connect those first humans to those who follow subsequently in the story, down to Noah and down to Abraham, the legendary father of the Jewish people. God makes a covenant with Noah after the flood that he will never more seek to destroy all of humankind. And the sign of this covenant is the rainbow. We fly a rainbow flag outside our church. There's a rainbow in front of the pulpit. That may remind us that God promised to allow the survival of the human race. God also makes a covenant with Abraham to make of his descendants a great nation. The sign of this covenant is circumcision. Generation to generation. I know that particular sign leaves out half the people in the group. But it's striking then that while only the males can have the physical sign of the covenant, one's actual Jewishness under Jewish law is determined by the female line. My wife Jacqueline, with a Jewish mother and a Protestant father, is Jewish under the law, but she would not be had the religious origins of her parents been reversed. And the writer of Matthew's Gospel, 800 years after the writer of Genesis, started out his account of the life of Jesus by establishing Jesus' pedigree all the way back to Abraham. It is interesting that while Matthew maintains that Jesus' true father was the Holy Spirit, it connects him to Abraham through a male line running down to Joseph the carpenter, who is at best a surrogate parent, but who is necessary to fulfill a prophecy in the Hebrew Bible that the Messiah will come from Jesse's stem, that is, from King David's line. The more basic point is that who you were in ancient times depended on who your ancestors were. Tribalism, in the original sense of that word, was very much alive then, as it still is in many parts of the world today. A covenant is an agreement. It's a type of contract. But the covenants God makes with Noah and with Abraham are no ordinary contracts. They are to be fulfilled not in the lifetime of the parties, but over the course of generations yet to come. A covenant runs generation to generation. This is shown in the second of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in the heaven above, or is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. That's the bold print that you usually see. It maybe say graven image instead of idol, but that's what you get. But then there's a sort of fine print under it that says the reason for this second commandment. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. End quote. So you have sort of a double policy of Yahweh towards future generations. Those who are bad will see their children and grandchildren punished for their transgression, while those who are righteous will be rewarded for 1,000 generations. Kind of an asymmetrical ethic, I think. One divide between contemporary liberals and conservatives is that liberals generally don't think it's fair in today's world for the sins of the fathers to be visited upon the children. A child born into a disadvantaged family does not choose to be born there. And to a liberal, fair social policy would try to see that child has a decent chance of making it into the mainstream. But none of us would have a problem with God bestowing love on 1,000 generations. Who can argue with that? Ancient people took seriously the idea that we owed our existence and fortune to our ancestors. I raised my family in Charleston, South Carolina, where it was often said that the Charlestonians were like the Chinese in that they ate rice and worshiped their ancestors. That joke points up the fact that many cultures have always revered the generations gone before. The idea that a particular family line could be blessed or cursed goes back to Greek tragedy. But in the great Eastern religions founded on the idea of rebirth, that is Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, there's another idea that runs counter to the family one. The idea that your good or bad fortune is due not to what your parents or grandparents did or failed to do, but what you did or failed to do in this life or a previous one, the idea of karma. Personal karma is a different way of explaining why some people attain the good life and others dwell in misery. And of course, with the liberal egalitarian ethic of the modern West, we officially renounce tribalism in favor of a democracy where everyone stands on his or her own individual merit. We're so used to this we don't even see it. And unreflectively we conceive of each generation as having invented itself. It used to be that wisdom was associated with age, that the younger people sought out the older for insight as to how to cope with the problems of life. But with the dizzying acceleration of technological change, we old folks sometimes give in to the notion that we don't have anything really useful to impart to the young. After all, if we can't program our own clock radio, what good is our advice on dating or romance or money or anything else in life? The continuity of knowledge from generation to generation has been altered. At the same time, there have been new technologies for making babies, and there are new constellations of families for raising them. We don't know what effect these changes will have on future generations. I'm not suggesting we go back to a traditional, elder-oriented culture, nor to the Ossian Harriet nuclear family, if it actually existed at all outside of network television. What I'm suggesting is that all these changes have not disrupted the basic chain of causation between the acts and events of one generation and the consequences to another. Here's Forest Church again. Remember, each of these ancestors had to live to puberty. For those whose bloodline twines through Europe, and there were like tragedies around the globe, not one of your millions of direct forebears died as children during the Great Plague, for instance, which mowed down half of Europe with its mighty scythe. Unquote. Then he references the book Olive Chatham read a couple of years ago. Quote, there's a new book out on the Mayflower. It's quite a good book. This is Forest Church. This is quite a good book, telling a lively, unlikely tale. 5 of my direct ancestors happened to be on that tiny boat, which brought the first band of dowdy pilgrims to our shores in 1620. Early in the book, I was brought up short when one of the 5, remember I wouldn't be here this morning without the unwitting assistance of all of them, 24-year-old John Howland, an unmarried servant, fell off the Mayflower into the ocean halfway across the Atlantic. Miraculously, he caught the rope his fellow pilgrims threw overboard in their desperate attempt to save him, and he lived. Had John Howland drowned, you might be hearing a better speech this morning, but I assuredly would not be delivering it. Forest Church. The sojourn of each of us on this earth is the result of thousands of such accidents. For some of us, that will be evidence enough that we were meant to be, that our life here was foreordained by the accumulation of these seemingly random accidents. Others will say that that feeling is an illusion. The random accidents are just that, and had no necessary relationship to the people we would become. I don't pretend to be able to resolve this one way or the other. But I do think that the gift of our lives from generation to generation, from our distant ancestors down to our own parents to us, calls us to a covenant with the generations still to come. In the Hebrew Bible, as I said, God makes the rainbow the sign of the covenant with Noah, that never again shall he attempt to destroy the whole human race. In our time, the human race seems bent on destroying itself without any help from God. I'd like to think that our rainbow flag signifies a covenant we make with the present and future generations, that all will be welcomed here. And the idea of a covenant with future generations shows up in both liberal and conservative concerns. Conservatives say we have to make the world habitable for coming generations by keeping to traditions such as marriage being only between a man and a woman, and by balancing the budget so that future generations are not saddled with debt. Liberals say we have to make the world habitable for future generations by eliminating racism, sexism, homophobia, by combating pollution, reversing climate change, controlling overpopulation, and developing clean and sustainable energy. Yet each of us, of whatever political stripe, will make many decisions based on our short-term convenience. 3 weeks ago, the Beacon Youth Outreach sang us a song for Earth Day called Driving Miss Lazy, about not driving the car any more than necessary. I was entranced with the song, but I have to say that on many occasions since then, I have driven when I couldn't have taken my bike. We vote with our dollars in the marketplace, promoting businesses which might create jobs in the short run, but be harmful to the environment in the long run. Indeed, it is hard work to make a covenant with future generations real, to bend the arc of human development towards sustainability. It requires us to be informed and to care, and sometimes to leave our comfort zones. But many of you have and are doing this. Many of you have done the unglamorous work of sitting on committees and listening to experts and making recommendations about what to do with our wastewater, our fisheries, our abundant natural resources. In the second commandment, God promises his steadfast love unto the 1,000th generation. Let us on this Mother's Day feel a love like this for all the generations which have gone before and those who will come after. Yes, there may be complete scoundrels as well as righteous people in our family trees. There may have been difficult parents, and there may be children and grandchildren who did not grow up as we had hoped. Love them anyway. Your life is a gift. You are a gift. And you, and you, and you, as am I. Wildly improbable gifts each. Yes, I know. Some days you'd like to find the gift exchange window where you can take it back. Where you'd be somebody else. Someone you think is more rich or famous or beautiful or happy or wise. But that's not the way it works. You have your life. You have your Eunice. And the choice you have is not to exchange your life for someone else's, but to be happy with the series of accidents that produced you and all your ancestors. or sit around wishing things had been different. Generation to generation, Mother's Day calls us to remember how we are all connected genealogically. Every morning when I wake up in my bed here in Chatham, the first thing my eyes rest upon is a poster of wild geese in flight with the words from Mary Oliver's poem that we read a little earlier. The harsh and exciting call of the wild geese remind us of our place in the family of things. No matter how lonely, no matter how much despair. Margaret Mead said, always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everybody else. Let us celebrate the unique and improbable and unexchangeable gift that is our existence, made possible by the unique and improbable and unexchangeable gift of all the generations who walked this planet from the beginning of Homo sapiens, generation to generation. Listen to the call of the wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscape, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clean blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family.